When we sit down with a cup of tea and think about where Eastern philosophy began, the first place we have to go is the land of the Vedas. The Vedas are a set of old poems and chants that were spoken by priests long before anyone wrote them down. They are not just songs. They are the first attempts to ask why the world is the way it is. The word Veda means knowledge. In those early verses, the sages are looking for a pattern, a rule that can hold the world together. They call that rule dharma. Dharma is a word that can mean duty, law, or the right way to act. It is like the rhythm of a farmer's life. Imagine a farmer who wakes up before the sun. In the spring, he plants seeds. In the summer, he waters them. In the autumn, he harvests. In the winter, he rests and repairs his tools. Each season has a role. If the farmer tries to plant in the middle of winter, the seeds will die. If he forgets to water in the summer, the crops will wither. The farmer's cycle shows us what dharma looks like. It is not a rule that comes from a book. It is a pattern that keeps everything in balance. The farmer follows the pattern because it works. In the same way, the Vedic sages saw dharma as the pattern that keeps the world alive. The earliest Vedic texts are the Rig Veda, the Sama Veda, the Yajur Veda, and the Atharva Veda. They were spoken by a group of people we call the rishis, or seers. The rishis did not sit in a quiet room and write down thoughts. They walked in forests, they tended cattle, they sang by the fire. Their words were passed from one generation to the next by memory. The Rig Veda, for example, is full of hymns that praise the forces of nature, the wind, the fire, the rain. The verses say that these forces are not random. They have a purpose. The rishis felt that the world was alive, that each part was linked to the rest. One of the most famous early thinkers is Yajnavalkya. He appears in the later Upanishads, especially the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Yajnavalkya is known for a long dialogue with a group of women, and also for a famous question. Who am I? He asks the question not as a puzzle, but as a way to cut through the noise of daily life. In his conversation he says, all this is Brahman, the one reality. Brahman is a word that means the ultimate reality, the source that holds everything together. Yajnavalkya's words are simple, yet they open a whole new way of looking at life. He says that the self is not just the body or the mind, but something deeper that is the same in every living thing. The Upanishads are the second wave of Vedic thought. While the early Vedas focus on rituals and prayers, the Upanishads turn inward. They ask what lies behind the rituals. They ask what the self really is. They also introduce the idea of karma. Karma means action and its result. It is not a punishment system. It is a natural law, like gravity. If you push a ball, it rolls. If you act with kindness, you create a ripple of goodwill. A child learning to share a toy shows us karma in action. The child may not understand the word, but they feel the joy of giving and the smile of the friend. That feeling is the seed of karma. It grows into habits that shape a life. The early Upanishads also talk about moksha, or liberation. Liberation means being free from the cycle of birth and death. It is not an escape from life, but a deep understanding that the self is already free. The Upanishads use simple stories to illustrate this. One story tells of a boy who sees his reflection in a pond and thinks it is another boy. When he reaches out, the water ripples and the image disappears. The lesson is that the self we chase is often just a reflection. These ideas did not stay in the mountains. They traveled along trade routes, along rivers and into towns. By the time we get to the time of the Buddha, the ideas of dharma, karma, and moksha have already been spoken about for centuries. The Buddha's own story begins with a striking birth. He was born in Lumbini, under a tree that bent over his cradle. According to the ancient texts, as soon as he was born, he took 7 steps in each of the 4 directions, and each step left a lotus flower behind him. The texts quote the moment. In the stillness of the night, a child was born who would know the end of suffering. The story is meant to show that his birth was not ordinary. It signals that he was meant to teach a new path. When the Buddha grew up, he left his palace and saw the reality of old age, sickness, and death. He then sat under the Bodhi tree and searched for a way out of suffering. After many days, he found a middle path that avoids both extreme self-indulgence and extreme self-denial. He called his discovery the 4 Noble Truths. The first truth says life has suffering. The second says suffering comes from desire. The third says there is a way out of desire. The fourth says the way out is the Eightfold Path. This path includes right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. The Buddha's teaching is a practical guide that fits into everyday life. It is not a distant theory. It is a set of steps you can try in your own day. After the Buddha's death, his followers gathered for a big meeting called the First Buddhist Council. According to tradition, 500 monks came together at Rajgir, near the city of Bodh Gaya. They sat in a circle and recited what they remembered of the Buddha's words. The council's purpose was to keep the teachings pure and to make sure that the core ideas were not lost. The story tells us that the monks recited the Dhamma and the Vinaya. The Dhamma is the teaching. The Vinaya is the rule of conduct for monks. A quote from the council's record says, "We hold fast to the truth that was spoken by the Enlightened One, that suffering ends when desire ends." This council shows us that early Buddhist thought was organized, that the community cared about preserving the message. Even as the Buddhist community was forming, the Vedic and Upanishadic ideas kept evolving. Later philosophers like Shankara would take the Upanishadic concept of Brahman and explain it in new ways. Shankara argued that the world we see is like a dream, and the true self is the same as Brahman. He used the phrase Tat Tvam Asi, which means that you are. This phrase appears in the Chandogya Upanishad. It is a short line, but it tells us that the individual self and the ultimate reality are one. In later sections of this series, we will look at how Hindu metaphysics builds on this idea and how it differs from Buddhist emptiness. Now, let us look at some arguments that early Indian thinkers made. One argument is that the world is not random. The Vedic hymns say that each element follows a pattern. The Upanishads argue that the self is not just a body. Yajnavalkya says that the self is the witness of all thoughts, like a lamp that lights a room but does not become the room. He asks, what is it that sees the sunrise? It is not the eye. It is the mind that watches the eye. This simple question leads to the idea that there is a deeper awareness behind all experiences. Another argument is about karma. The early sages say that every action plants a seed. If you plant a good seed, you will reap a good harvest. If you plant a bad seed, you will get weeds. This idea is used to explain why some people seem to have good lives and others have hard lives. It is not a punishment from a god, but a natural result of past actions. In modern terms, we can think of it as cause and effect in a moral sense. These arguments have faced criticism. One common criticism is that the ideas are just myths. Some people say that the stories of gods, of the lotus steps, and of the Upanishadic dialogues are just fairy tales. They argue that there is no proof that a soul exists or that karma works. They say that without evidence, these ideas are just stories we tell ourselves. In response, the early thinkers point out that the value of a story is not only in proof, but in how it guides life. They say that if a story helps a person act with kindness, then it has real power. The Buddha himself said that a teaching should be tested by experience, not by blind belief. A second criticism says that the ideas are too abstract for everyday life. A farmer may not think about Brahman while planting rice. A child may not think about karma while sharing a toy. Critics argue that these concepts belong in a temple, not in the field. The counter to this criticism is that the concepts were meant to be lived, not just talked about. The farmer's seasonal cycle is an example of dharma in action. The child sharing is an example of karma in practice. When we see how the ideas fit into daily chores, the abstract becomes concrete. Later sections will show how modern teachers use mindfulness, a practice that comes from Buddhist meditation, to help people stay calm in traffic or at work. That is a direct link between ancient ideas and modern life. Real-world applications of these early ideas are many. In India, the concept of dharma guides people's choices about work, family, and community. A teacher may say that a student's dharma is to study, while a farmer's dharma is to tend the land. In modern business, leaders sometimes talk about doing the right thing as a form of dharma. In the West, the idea of karma has become popular in self-help books. People say that if they act with generosity, they will feel better later. While the language may change, the core idea stays the same. Actions have consequences. Modern interpretations also bring new light. Some scholars compare the Upanishadic idea of the self as a witness to the modern psychological concept of the observing mind. They say that when you notice your thoughts without getting caught in them, you are practicing a form of the ancient meditation taught by Yajnavalkya. In neuroscience, researchers have found that mindfulness meditation can change brain patterns. This gives a scientific angle to the ancient claim that meditation leads to clarity. In later sections, we will explore how Buddhist meditation techniques have been adapted into therapy, showing how the early Buddhist path still works today. Let us go back to the farmer's example. Imagine a farmer who has to decide whether to sell his wheat now or wait for a better price later. The farmer knows that the market changes with the seasons. He also knows that his family needs food now. He weighs his duty to provide with the larger pattern of the market. This weighing is dharma in action. He does not simply follow a rule. He listens to the rhythm of the land and the needs of his family. The decision becomes a lived expression of dharma. Now think of a child who learns to share a snack with a sibling. At first, the child may want to keep it all. When the sibling asks, the child feels a tug of desire. If the child shares, the sibling smiles, and the child feels warm inside. That warm feeling is the first taste of karma. It is not a reward from a god, but a natural response to a kind act. Over time, the child learns that sharing brings more joy than hoarding. This simple lesson is the seed of a moral life. Another analogy that helps is a river flowing to the sea. The river follows the path carved by the land. It cannot choose a different route without breaking. The river's movement is like dharma. It follows the shape of the world. If the river tries to go uphill, it will stop. In the same way, a person who tries to act against the natural order will meet resistance. The river also carries things downstream. What the river carries can be clean water or dirty waste. The river does not judge. It simply moves. This shows how actions, karma, travel forward, affecting what comes after. We also have the story of the first Buddhist assembly, where 500 monks gathered. The council was held under a great tree. The monks took turns reciting the Buddha's words. One monk, Ananda, is said to have spoken the line, "All that is seen is impermanent." This line reminds us that nothing stays the same. It ties back to the Upanishadic idea that the world is like a dream. Both traditions see the material world as temporary, urging us to look deeper. The Buddha's birth story also gives us a picture of how myths can carry truth. The lotus flowers that appeared under his feet are not meant to be taken as literal plants. They are symbols of purity rising from mud. The Buddha's first steps in the four directions show his role as a teacher for all peoples. The story uses vivid images to make the idea memorable. Even if we see it as a myth, the story points us toward the lesson that a new way of living is possible. When we compare the early Vedic ideas to later Buddhist thought, we see both overlap and difference. Both speak of suffering and a path out of it. The Vedic Upanishads speak of realizing the self as Brahman, while the Buddha teaches that there is no permanent self. This difference will be explored in later sections on Buddhist emptiness and Hindu metaphysics. The Buddha's teaching of no self, anatta, challenges the Upanishadic claim that the self is the same as Brahman. Yet both traditions agree that seeing beyond ordinary appearances brings peace. A quote from the Chandogya Upanishad says, "As one acts, so does one become." This line mirrors the Buddha's teaching that our actions shape our future. It also matches the modern idea that habits shape character. The Upanishad adds that the true self watches these actions, while the Buddha adds that the self is not a fixed thing at all. The conversation between these two views creates a rich dialogue that continues in philosophy today. Another primary source quote comes from the Rig Veda, where a hymn to the sun says, "He who lights the world, may he also light our hearts." This simple line shows that the ancient poets saw a connection between the outer world and inner life. They believed that the same order that moves the sun can move a person's mind. This idea is echoed in modern mindfulness practice, where we use breath as a guide to stay present, linking the body's rhythm to the mind's calm. The early sages also used stories to teach. One story tells of a boy named Shwetakatu who asks his father, "What is the true self?" The father replies, "It is the breath that moves, the silence that listens." The boy learns that the self is not a thing you can hold, but a process you can watch. This story is used in later Buddhist texts to illustrate the practice of observing thoughts without attachment. A second anecdote comes from the Upanishadic dialogue between Yajnavalkya and his wife, Maitreyi. Yajnavalkya says, "If I had 1,000 gold coins, could I be happy?" Maitreyi replies, "No, because happiness is not in gold. It is in knowing the self." This conversation shows that the early thinkers saw wealth as a distraction from the real search. It also shows that they valued inner knowledge over external riches. These stories, quotes, and analogies help us see how early Indian thought was not just abstract speculation. It was a living practice, tied to daily work, to family life, and to the cycles of nature. The farmer's seasonal work, the child's sharing, the river's flow, all become ways to understand dharma and karma. The early sages gave us tools to ask big questions while staying grounded in everyday life. Critics who say that these ideas are only myths can be answered by looking at the impact they have had. For more than 2,000 years, people have used these ideas to shape laws, to guide education, to comfort the grieving. The fact that the ideas have survived is itself a kind of evidence that they touch something real in human experience. The Buddha's own method was to test each claim against experience. He said, "Do not accept anything because it is written or because a teacher says so. Test it in your own life." This instruction invites us to try when we first talked about the Indian roots of Buddhism, we mentioned that it grew out of a time when people were asking big questions about why life feels so hard. Now we turn to the core teachings that the Buddha gave to answer those questions. Think of these teachings as a simple guide that anyone can use, no matter where they live or what they do. We will walk through the Four Noble Truths, then the Eightfold Path, and we will see how they fit together like a recipe for a balanced diet. The first thing the Buddha said is that life has a kind of built-in traffic jam. He called this dukkha, which most people translate as suffering or unsatisfying feeling. Imagine you are stuck on a highway, cars inching forward, horns blaring, and you can get anywhere. That feeling of being stuck, of wanting to move but being held back, is a lot like the way we feel when we want happiness, but keep hitting the same problems over and over. The Buddha said this traffic jam is real for everyone. The second truth is that we can see why the jam happens. The Buddha taught that the jam is caused by three things: craving, aversion, and ignorance. Craving is when we keep reaching for more food, more praise, more comfort. Aversion is the opposite, when we push away anything that feels bad. Ignorance is not knowing how things really work, especially the fact that we think we own a permanent self that never changes. When we add these three together, they keep us stuck in the jam. The third truth is the good news. The jam can end. The Buddha said that if we stop feeding craving, aversion, and ignorance, the traffic will clear. He did say it would happen instantly, but he promised that it is possible. This is the cessation of dukkha, the end of the jam. The fourth truth is the map that shows us how to clear the road. This map is called the Eightfold Path. Think of the path like a recipe for a balanced diet. Just as a good meal needs protein, vegetables, grains, and a little spice, the path needs 8 parts that work together. If you skip one part, the meal feels off, and if you skip one part of the path, the mind feels unsteady. The first part of the recipe is right view. This is like looking at the traffic from a high hill, so you can see the whole pattern. Right view means understanding that craving, aversion, and ignorance are the cause of the jam, and that they can be let go. The Buddha said, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought." When we see how our thoughts shape our experience, we start to change them. The second part is right intention. This is the decision to cook a healthy meal instead of fast food. It means we choose to let go of desire for selfish gain, to be kind, and to act with compassion. It is not just a wish. It is a firm plan to act in a way that reduces suffering. The third part is right speech. This is like choosing fresh ingredients instead of spoiled ones. It means we speak truthfully, avoid gossip, and do not use harsh words. When we speak well, we clear a lot of the mental traffic that comes from misunderstandings. The fourth part is right action. This is the step where we actually put the food on the stove. It means we act in ways that do not harm others, that respect life, and that follow basic moral rules. The Buddha taught the 5 precepts, which are simple promises. Do not kill, do not steal, do not lie, do not misuse sex, and do not take intoxicants. These actions keep the mind steady. The 5th part is right livelihood. This is like choosing a job that lets you afford healthy food without hurting others. It means we pick work that does not cause suffering, such as not dealing in weapons, drugs, or exploitation. When our work aligns with our values, the traffic in our mind eases. The 6th part is right effort. This is the daily practice of stirring the pot, making sure the food does not burn. It means we try to keep wholesome thoughts, and we work to drop unwholesome ones. It is a gentle push, not a harsh shove. The 7th part is right mindfulness. This is the moment when we taste the food, notice the flavor, and stay present. It means we pay attention to what is happening in our body, our feelings, and our thoughts without judging them. Mindfulness helps us see when we slip back into craving or aversion. The 8th part is right concentration. This is the quiet time after the meal, when we sit and feel satisfied. It means we develop deep focus through meditation, allowing the mind to settle. When the mind is calm, it is easier to see the traffic jam from far away. Together, these 8 steps form a balanced way of living. Like a good diet, each part supports the others. If you only eat vegetables and skip protein, you feel weak. If you only practice meditation but ignore how you speak to others, the mind still gets tangled. The Buddha taught that the path is not a list to check off, but a way of being that grows with practice. Now let's hear a voice from the past. The Buddha, sitting under the Bodhi tree, said, 3 things cannot be hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. He spoke these words after a night of deep meditation when the rain stopped and the sky cleared. He realized that the truth about suffering and its end was not something to keep secret. It was something to share. That moment under the tree is the first anecdote we need. The Buddha had left a life of luxury, tried many teachers, and finally sat down to see what was inside his own mind. When the dawn broke, he saw that the traffic jam could be cleared. He called this insight awakening or enlightenment. It was not a magical power. It was a clear seeing of how craving, aversion, and ignorance work, and how they could be let go. Another story shows how the teachings traveled far beyond the Indian plains. About 200 years after the Buddha's death, traders on the Silk Road carried not only silk and spices, but also ideas. One caravan stopped in a Chinese city called Dunhuang. A monk named Kumarajiva translated many Buddhist texts into Chinese. The locals listened, and the ideas of the 4 Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path began to shape Chinese thought. This spread is our second anecdote. It shows that the teachings are not locked in one culture. They can travel like a river finding new valleys. You might wonder how these ancient ideas fit into modern life. One example is a student who feels anxious before exams. The student notices the anxiety as a traffic jam of thoughts. I must get a perfect score, or I will fail. By using right mindfulness, the student watches the thoughts without getting stuck, and by using right effort, the student replaces the fear with a calm intention to study well. Over time, the student's stress lessens, showing how the path works in everyday life. Another example is a worker who feels pressure to climb the corporate ladder at any cost. The worker uses right intention and right action to decide that helping colleagues is more important than personal fame. By aligning work with compassion, the worker feels less trapped in the chase for status, and the mental traffic eases. Some people raise a counter-argument that Buddhism denies a permanent self, and that this denial makes life feel empty. They say, if there is no real me, why care about anything? This question goes back to the Buddha's teaching of anatta, which means no self. The Buddha said that what we call self is just a collection of changing parts, thoughts, feelings, body, and consciousness. He did not mean that we do not exist at all, but that we do not have a fixed, unchanging core. To answer the worry, we can point to the modern science of psychology, which shows that our sense of self is built from many processes that constantly shift. When we cling to a fixed self, we add more traffic to the jam. Letting go of that fixed idea can actually open space for compassion and connection, not emptiness. A second counter-argument is that Buddhism encourages people to detach from the world, to become monks and avoid everyday life. Critics say this leads to selfishness or neglect of responsibilities. The Buddha's own life offers a reply. After his enlightenment, he spent the rest of his days teaching laypeople, farmers, merchants, and kings. He taught that detachment does not mean ignoring the world. It means not being ruled by cravings and aversions. A monk can still care for a neighbor, just as a layperson can practice the path while raising a family. The key is balance, not escape. Nagarjuna, a thinker who lived many centuries after the Buddha, took these ideas further. He wrote about emptiness, the idea that all things lack an independent, permanent nature. He said, things do not exist on their own. This may sound confusing, but it simply means that everything depends on something else. A tree depends on soil, water, and sunlight. In the same way, our thoughts depend on many causes. Nagarjuna's view supports the Buddha's teaching that there is no permanent self. It also helps us see why clinging to things causes suffering, because the things we cling to are always changing. When we compare these ideas with other traditions, we see both differences and overlaps. In Hinduism, there is the concept of Atman, a permanent soul. Buddhism says that this permanent soul is an illusion, yet both traditions agree that ignorance about the true nature of reality leads to suffering. In modern therapy, especially cognitive behavioral therapy, practitioners teach people to notice unhelpful thoughts and replace them, which mirrors right mindfulness and right effort. This shows that the ancient path still speaks to us today. Let's bring the traffic jam metaphor back. Imagine you are driving and you see a sign that says, Exit 12, Compassion. If you stay in the jam, you miss the exit. By practicing the path, you learn to change lanes, to see the signs, and to take the exit that leads out of the jam. The path is not a shortcut that instantly removes all problems. It is the skill of driving calmly, noticing the road, and making good choices. Now think of the recipe again. If you skip the vegetables, the meal is heavy and unhealthy. If you skip the spices, the meal is bland. The Eightfold Path is the full set of ingredients. Right speech is the fresh herbs that add flavor. Right concentration is the slow simmer that lets the flavors blend. When all parts are present, the mind feels nourished and balanced. We have talked about the Buddha's awakening, the spread of his teaching along the Silk Road, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the questions about self and detachment, and the later work of Nagarjuna. All of these pieces fit together like a puzzle that shows how Buddhism grew from a single person's insight into a worldwide tradition. As we move forward, we will see how this tradition changes again in the form of Zen, a school that focuses on direct experience and simple practice. The Zen chapter will pick up the thread of mindfulness and concentration, but it will use stories and koans to point directly at the heart of the path. Before we close, let's hear another short quote from the Buddha that sums up the practical tone we have been using. He said, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." This reminds us that the traffic jam lives in the mind, and the tools we have, mindfulness, compassion, right effort, are the ways to clear it. And from Nagarjuna, we have, "When you see that all things are empty, you are free from clinging." Both quotes tell us that the change starts inside, not in some faraway place. In everyday life, you can try a simple exercise. Pick one moment today, maybe while waiting in line at the coffee shop. Notice the feeling of impatience, the urge to check your phone, the breath in your chest. Label the feeling as craving or aversion. Then let it pass like a car that moves forward after the light turns green. This tiny practice is a mini version of the path, a bite of the balanced diet we talked about. Over time, many bites add up to a healthier mind. Remember how we began with the Indian roots, the time of questioning and searching. The Buddha's answer was the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, a guide that works like a recipe and a roadmap. We have seen how the teachings traveled across deserts on the Silk Road, how later thinkers like Nagarjuna sharpened the ideas, and how modern life can still use them. Next, we will look at Zen, where the focus turns to sitting meditation and simple stories that point straight to the heart of the path. So as you sip your coffee, think of the traffic jam on the highway, think of the balanced meal you might prepare, and know that the tools to ease the jam are already in your hands. The Buddha showed us a way out, and every step we take on the path is a step toward a clearer road. Keep the curiosity alive, keep the questions gentle, and keep the practice steady. The journey is long, but each small effort adds up, just like each grain of rice makes a bowl of rice. The road ahead is open, and the teachings are ready to walk with you. When we first met Taoism, we heard about a word that sounds like Tao. That word is Tao, or the way. It is the idea that everything in the world moves along a natural path. The Tao is not a god you pray to. It is more like a pattern you can see when you watch a river flow or a tree grow. Laozi, the man who wrote the first Taoist book, called the Tao the great mother of all things. He said, "The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao." In other words, any definition we give will miss the true sense of it. Laozi lived in ancient China, probably around the 6th century BCE. Legend says he was an older librarian who grew tired of the chaos of his time. One night he left his city on an old ox, heading west toward the mountains. As he rode, he wrote down his thoughts on a piece of bark. That short text became the Tao Te Ching, or Classic of the Way and its Power. The story of his quiet exit on an ox is told in many old records. It shows a man who chose to follow the natural flow rather than fight the world. Another key voice is Zhuangzi, who lived a few centuries later. He wrote a book that bears his name. Zhuangzi loved to tell stories that make us think about how we see reality. One of his most famous tales is about dreaming he was a butterfly. In the dream he fluttered and felt free. When he woke, he wondered whether he was a man who had dreamed he was a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming he was a man. He wrote, "Butterflies are not aware of the difference between waking and dreaming." That line, pushes us to see that our fixed ideas may be just as fleeting as a dream. Both Laozi and Zhuangzi talk about a practice called Wu. The phrase literally means non-action, but it does not mean doing nothing. It means acting without forcing, like a leaf that rides a stream. If you try to push against the current, you waste energy. If you let the water carry you, you move smoothly. Think of a garden that grows without forced pruning. The gardener watches, waters, and removes only what blocks the natural growth. The plants find their own shape. That is the spirit of Wu Wei. The Taoist view of natural balance fits well with the idea of yin and yang. Yin is the quiet, dark, receptive side. Yang is the bright, active, giving side. The two are not opposed. They fit together like night and day. When one side grows too strong, the other pushes back and restores harmony. Laozi wrote, "When the great Tao is forgotten, kindness and morality arise. When kindness and morality arise, the great Tao is forgotten again." He meant that when people try to force rules, the natural flow gets blocked. Let's look at a simple example. Imagine you are trying to learn to ride a bike. If you grip the handlebars too tightly, you wobble and fall. If you relax, feel the balance, you glide. The relaxed rider is practicing Wu Wei. Another example is a river that cuts a canyon over many years. It does not dig with a pick. It simply follows the path of least resistance, wearing away rock slowly. That patient, steady flow shows how the Tao works in nature. Taoism also offers ideas about how to live a good life. It says we should keep our desires low, stay humble, and let things happen as they will. It does not give a long list of rules like some other philosophies. Instead, it points us to a way of being that matches the world. This can feel freeing, but it can also feel vague. Some critics say, if there are no clear moral rules, how do we know what is right? That is one of the main counter-arguments to Taoism. A second criticism says Taoism can be used to excuse passivity. If we always follow the flow, we might ignore injustice or avoid taking action when something is wrong. A person could claim, "The Tao says I should not interfere," and then stay silent while a friend suffers. This worry shows that the idea of non-forcing can be twisted into a reason to do nothing. Taoist teachers respond that true non-forcing is not the same as ignoring. It means acting in a way that does not create new conflict, but still caring for others. In real life, Taoist ideas have shown up in many places. In Chinese medicine, doctors talk about balancing the flow of qi, the life energy that moves through the body. They use acupuncture to clear blockages, much like a river that needs a clear channel. In martial arts, the principle of using an opponent's force against them mirrors Wu Wei. A skilled practitioner does not meet force with force. They redirect it, staying calm while the opponent's energy moves away. Modern thinkers have taken Taoist ideas into new fields. Environmentalists often cite the Taoist respect for natural balance when arguing for sustainable living. They say we should not force the planet to produce more than it can handle, but let ecosystems find their own rhythm. In psychology, the concept of flow, described by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, resembles the Taoist state of effortless action. When a person is fully absorbed in a task, they lose self-consciousness and act without strain. That feeling is much like the river's current carrying a leaf downstream. Even in business, some leaders talk about lean management, which tries to cut waste and let processes run smoothly. They compare their work to a garden that grows without forced pruning. The goal is to let employees find the best ways to do their jobs, rather than imposing strict rules from above. That approach echoes Taoist thought that the best outcomes arise when people follow their natural strengths. When we compare Taoism to the Indian philosophies we discussed earlier, a clear contrast appears. In the earlier section we talked about Hindu Dharma and Buddhist Eightfold Path, both of which give clear ethical guidelines. Taoism, by contrast, offers a softer, more open-ended way to live. It does not tell you to follow a set of commandments. Instead, it asks you to observe the world and move with its rhythm. This difference helps us see why Taoism feels more like a meditation on nature than a strict moral code. The story of Laozi's departure on an ox also ties into this contrast. While Hindu sages often retreated to forests to meditate, Laozi left the city quietly, riding an animal that moves at its own pace. He did not set out to found a school, he simply left. The tale shows a man who trusted the Tao enough to step away from the noise of society. It also reminds us that Taoism values personal experience over formal doctrine. Zhuangzi's butterfly dream adds another layer. Indian thought, the idea of Maya, or illusion, tells us that the world is not what it seems. Zhuangzi's dream pushes the same point in a playful way. He asks us to question the line between reality and imagination. If we can be a butterfly in a dream, perhaps our daily worries are also fleeting. That question helps us loosen our grip on rigid ideas, which is a core Taoist practice. Now let's bring in a couple more examples that show how the Tao works in daily life. Picture a child learning to tie shoes. If the parent forces the child to do it quickly, the child may get frustrated and give up. If the parent lets the child watch, try, and make mistakes, the skill will eventually click. The child learns by following the natural rhythm of trial and error. That patient approach mirrors the Taoist idea of letting things develop in their own time. Another everyday picture is cooking a soup. If you keep stirring aggressively, the flavors may not blend. If you let the soup simmer gently, the ingredients mingle and the taste improves. The gentle heat respects the natural process, while the constant stirring tries to control it. The calm simmer is a small way to practice Wu Wei in the kitchen. Taoist texts also include short sayings that capture the spirit. Laozi wrote, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." This reminds us that big changes start small, and we should not rush. Zhuangzi said, "Happiness is the absence of the notion of happiness." He meant that chasing happiness can make us miss the simple peace that comes when we stop trying. Both lines point us toward a calm, steady way of being. When we think about how Taoism can be used in modern life, we can see its influence in mindfulness practices. Many meditation teachers ask students to sit like a tree, rooted but flexible, watching thoughts flow like clouds. That image is directly borrowed from Taoist ideas of natural flow. The practice does not demand a belief in any higher power. It simply asks you to be present, which is the core of the Tao. There are also critics who point out that Taoism's lack of clear rules can be a problem in law or governance. A ruler who tries to follow the Tao might be accused of being too hands-off, letting corruption grow unchecked. The ancient Chinese philosopher Han Fei, who wrote about legalism, argued that strong laws are needed to keep order. He saw Taoist non-action as dangerous for a state that needs firm direction. This historical debate shows how Taoist ideas have been tested against other political thoughts. Nevertheless, some leaders have tried to blend Taoist ideas with strong governance. The Tang dynasty emperor Xuanzong invited Taoist scholars to the court, hoping their wisdom would calm the empire. He asked them to advise on how to keep the empire in balance, not by strict laws, but by allowing the people to live in harmony with nature. The result was a period of peace and cultural flourishing, showing that Taoist ideas can work together with practical rulemaking. In our next segment, we will turn to Confucian ethics, which offers a more rule-based view of how to act in society. Confucius emphasized respect for family, loyalty, and proper conduct. By comparing his teachings with Taoist ideas, we can see how two major Chinese traditions answer the same question. How should we live? While Taoism says, go with the flow, Confucianism says, follow the proper steps. Understanding both will give us a richer picture of Chinese thought. To sum up, Taoism invites us to see the world as a river, a garden, a butterfly, and an ox. It asks us to move with the current, not against it. It tells us that the best way to act is often the one that feels natural, not forced. It offers a calm way to think about life, but it also faces questions about moral clarity and passivity. By looking at the stories of Laozi's quiet exit and Zhuangzi's dream, we can feel the lived side of these ideas. By seeing how they appear in medicine, martial arts, business, and modern mindfulness, we see that the Tao is still alive today. In the next part, we will explore how Confucian ethics adds a different layer, giving us a fuller view of how ancient China tried to make sense of the world. Confucius was born in a time of war and chaos. He grew up in a small state called Lu, and he saw families torn apart, rulers fighting, and people living in fear. From those early days, he learned that a stable life needed more than just strong armies. He believed that if each person knew how to act well with the people around them, the whole society could become calm and fair. That idea is what we call Confucian ethics, and it still shapes how many people think about family, respect, and proper conduct. The heart of Confucian thought is a word that sounds like Ren. In simple terms, it means kindness or humanity. It is the feeling that makes us care for others. Confucius taught that Ren is not just a warm feeling, it is a habit we practice every day. When we speak politely, when we help a neighbor, when we listen to a friend, we are showing Ren. He said that a person who has Ren can become a good leader, because people will trust someone who treats them with care. Another key idea is Li. Li is often translated as ritual or proper conduct. It is the set of rules that tell us how to behave in different situations. Think of it as the manners you learn at home, at school, and in public. Li tells us when to bow, when to speak, how to address elders, and how to celebrate festivals. Confucius believed that when people follow Li, they keep order without needing force. He said that Li is like a map that guides us through daily life, helping us avoid conflict. Confucius also laid out 5 basic relationships. These are ruler and subject, father and son, husband and wife, older sibling and younger sibling, and friend and friend. Each pair has a clear role. The person higher in the pair has a duty to be caring and just. The person lower in the pair has a duty to be respectful and obedient. When each person does their part, the whole community works smoothly. The idea is not that one person can boss the other forever, but that each role supports the other like a bridge. To see how this works, imagine a classroom. The teacher stands at the front. The students sit in rows. The teacher's job is to guide, to give lessons, to keep the class safe. The student's job is to listen, to do their work, to respect the teacher's authority. If the teacher is kind, fair, and prepared, the students feel safe and are more likely to learn. If the students are polite and do their homework, the teacher can focus on teaching. The classroom runs well because each person knows their role and respects the others. That picture matches the Confucian view of society. Now, picture a sports team. The coach plans the strategy, calls the plays, and decides who starts. The players trust the coach's decisions, they follow the game plan, and they support each other on the field. In return, the coach respects each player's skill, gives them chances to shine, and encourages them when they make mistakes. The success of the team depends on both the coach's guidance and the player's effort. The coach and players are like the ruler and subject, each caring for the other. The team's harmony shows how mutual respect can turn a group of individuals into a strong unit. Confucius recorded his teachings in a book called The Analects. One short story from that book shows the power of filial piety, which is the respect children owe to their parents. A man named Zhengzi's son fell seriously ill. The son was so weak that he could not eat. Zhengzi's wife told him to give the boy a small piece of rice. Zhengzi replied, "If I give him a piece of rice now, he will die of hunger later. I must give him enough food to survive." He then prepared a bowl of soup and fed his son until he recovered. The story ends with the line, "The master said, 'A son who loves his father is like a tree that bears fruit.'" This anecdote shows how caring for family is the first step toward caring for the whole world. Another historical episode that shows Confucian ideas in action is the civil service exam system of the Tang dynasty. The Tang rulers wanted officials who could read the classics and understand moral principles, not just nobles born into power. They set up a series of tests that asked candidates to write essays on Confucian texts, to compose poems, and to solve problems about governing fairly. Those who passed could become magistrates, judges, or ministers. The system opened doors for people from modest backgrounds who studied hard. It also spread Confucian values across the empire because officials carried those ideas into the provinces. The exam system lasted for centuries, shaping Chinese bureaucracy and reinforcing the belief that moral education leads to good government. While these stories highlight the strengths of Confucian ethics, there are also criticisms. One common counterargument is that the focus on hierarchy can lock people into rigid class structures. Because each role is seen as fixed, it can become hard for someone to move up or to question authority. In a society that stresses obedience, a poor farmer may feel it is his duty to accept his lot, even if the system is unfair. Critics say that this mindset can keep wealth and power in the hands of a few, making social change difficult. A second criticism is that Confucianism may limit personal freedom. The emphasis on duties to family, ruler, and tradition can crowd out individual desires. For example, a young person who wants to pursue art might feel pressured to take a stable government job because that is what the family expects. Some argue that the strong sense of duty can suppress creativity and personal growth. Modern thinkers sometimes point to these limits when they discuss how to adapt Confucian ideas for today's more individualistic world. Despite these concerns, Confucian ethics still finds real-world applications. In many East Asian families, respect for elders is a daily practice. Children greet grandparents with a bow. They listen when older relatives speak. And they help with household chores without being asked. This habit of respect creates a sense of belonging and reduces conflict at home. In schools, teachers often address students as students and expect them to stand up when the teacher enters. The classroom atmosphere feels orderly. and learning can happen without constant disruption. In the workplace, some companies adopt a Confucian style of management. Managers act as mentors, offering guidance and caring for employees' well-being. Employees, in turn, show loyalty and put the company's goals above personal gain. This relationship can lead to strong teamwork and low turnover. The idea of guanxi, which means relationships built on trust and mutual help, has roots in Confucian thought. When people invest time in building guanxi, they create networks that benefit both individuals and the larger community. Modern interpretations of Confucian ethics try to blend the old ideas with new values. Some scholars argue that the concept of Ren can be expanded to include environmental care. If we treat the planet with kindness, we are extending the same compassion that Confucius taught for people. Others suggest that Lai can be updated to fit digital etiquette, such as respecting privacy online and speaking politely in social media comments. In this way, the ancient framework becomes a flexible guide for contemporary life. There is also a dialogue between Confucianism and Taoism, the philosophy of balance and natural flow. Taoism teaches that we should follow the way of nature, not force things. Confucianism, on the other hand, stresses order and proper conduct. Yet both agree that extremes are harmful. A Taoist might say that being too strict with rules can create tension, while a Confucian would say that lacking rules leads to chaos. The two traditions together suggest a middle path. Follow proper conduct, but stay open to change, and let compassion guide the rules. This balance is often called the middle way, a concept that appears in both schools of thought. Let us return to the classroom analogy to see this balance in action. Imagine a teacher who insists on absolute silence at all times. The students might feel trapped, and learning could become stressful. If the teacher instead allows occasional jokes and discussion, the class stays lively while still respecting the learning process. The teacher's flexibility reflects the Taoist idea of going with the flow, while the basic structure of the class reflects Confucian order. When both ideas work together, the environment feels both safe and alive. Another picture comes from a sports team again. A coach who never changes the game plan, no matter how the opponents play, may lose matches. A coach who listens to the players, adjusts tactics, and still keeps the team disciplined shows both respect for the rules and adaptability. The team's success then depends on a mix of clear roles and the willingness to shift when needed. This mix mirrors how modern societies can keep traditions while embracing innovation. A famous quote from Confucius captures the spirit of his teaching. Do not do to others what you do not want done to yourself. This simple rule is often called the Golden Rule. It tells us to treat people the way we would like to be treated. It is a practical way to practice Ren in everyday life. Another line from the Analects reads, "The Master said, if you govern by virtue, you will be loved. If you govern by law, you will be feared." This shows that a ruler who leads with kindness earns loyalty, while one who relies only on punishment creates fear. The quote highlights the power of moral leadership, a core Confucian belief. When we look at history, we see how Confucian ideas helped shape governments beyond China. In Korea, the Joseon dynasty adopted Confucianism as the state philosophy. Scholars studied the classics, passed exams, and served in government. The emphasis on family values and respect for elders still influences Korean culture today. In Japan, the samurai class borrowed Confucian ideas about loyalty and proper conduct, mixing them with their own warrior code. Even in modern Vietnam, Confucian values appear in the way families care for older members and in the respect given to teachers. In contemporary times, Confucian ethics appears in public policy debates. Some leaders argue that education should focus not only on science and technology, but also on moral character. They propose curricula that teach students about respect, responsibility, and community service, echoing the Confucian goal of shaping virtuous citizens. Others suggest that social welfare programs should encourage family support rather than relying solely on the state, reflecting the idea that families are the first place of care. Critics, however, warn that using Confucian ideas to justify limited government can hide abuses of power. They point to historical periods when rulers claimed moral authority to suppress dissent. The balance between moral guidance and personal freedom remains a lively discussion. Some modern thinkers propose a Confucian democracy, where elected leaders must also demonstrate personal virtue and act with humility. In this model, the ruler's moral character becomes a check on power, just as Confucius advised rulers to lead by example. To bring the ideas back to everyday life, think of a simple family dinner. The parents set the table, the children help serve, and everyone says thanks before eating. The parents listen to the children's stories, and the children respect the parents' advice. This routine follows the pattern of Ren, Li, and the 5 relationships. It creates a sense of belonging and teaches each person how to act in larger groups. Even if the dinner is modest, the respect and care shared at the table echo the larger social harmony Confucius imagined. Another everyday example is a community garden. The organizer plans where each plot will go, decides the rules for watering and harvesting, and makes sure everyone has a chance to plant. The volunteers follow the schedule, keep the tools clean, and help neighbors who need extra help. The garden thrives because the organizer respects the volunteers, and the volunteers respect the organizer's plan. The garden becomes a small model of a well-ordered society, where each role supports the others. When we compare Confucian ethics to other philosophies, we see both overlaps and differences. Aristotle, a Greek thinker, also believed that virtue comes from habit, and that a good life requires balance. Both he and Confucius say that moral education is key to a healthy society. However, Aristotle focused more on the individual's pursuit of happiness, while Confucius placed the community at the center. This contrast helps us see why Confucianism feels more collective, and why it can sometimes clash with ideas of personal liberty. In the realm of religion, Buddhism entered China and mixed with Confucian ideas. Buddhist monks taught compassion and mindfulness, while Confucians emphasized proper conduct in daily life. Over time, many Chinese families blended the two, practicing rituals from both traditions. This blending shows that Confucian ethics is flexible enough to coexist with other belief systems, as long as the core values of respect and kindness are kept. Today, the world faces challenges that Confucian ethics can address. Climate change, for example, requires people to think beyond their own interests. The idea of Ren can be expanded to include the earth, urging us to treat nature with care. The principle of Li can guide how we interact online, reminding us to speak politely and avoid harmful rumors. The 5 relationships can be reimagined in modern contexts, such as mentor-mentee pairs in the workplace or the relationship between citizens and the state. By updating the language but keeping the spirit, Confucian ethics can help build a more cooperative world. In a modern city, a neighborhood association might adopt Confucian ideas to keep peace. The association sets simple rules. Keep noise down after 10 at night. Recycle properly. Help neighbors in need. The leaders of the association listen to residents, and residents follow the rules out of respect. When a new family moves in, the association welcomes them, shows them the guidelines, and invites them to community events. This process mirrors the Confucian goal of guiding people gently, using both respect and clear expectations. A final story from the Analects shows how a ruler can practice Ren. The Duke of Lu asked Confucius, "What is the way to rule a state?" Confucius answered, "Rule by virtue, and the people will follow you. Rule by force, and they will obey you out of fear." The Duke took this to heart, lowered taxes, and treated his officials fairly. The people prospered, and the state became known for peace. This anecdote illustrates how moral leadership can create lasting harmony. To sum up, Confucian ethics is built on 3 pillars: kindness, Ren; proper conduct, Li; and the 5 relationships that define how we treat each other. The ideas work like a classroom where the teacher and students each have clear roles, and like a sports team where the coach and players trust each other. Stories from the Analects, such as the caring son, and historical events like the Tang civil service exams, show how these ideas were lived out in the past. Counterarguments remind us that too much focus on hierarchy can freeze social mobility, and that strict duties can curb personal freedom. Yet the everyday examples of family meals, community gardens, and modern neighborhood groups show how the core values still help people live together peacefully. Cross-references to other thinkers, like Aristotle's virtue ethics, Taoist balance, and Buddhist compassion, enrich our understanding and show that the search for a good life is a shared human project. Modern scholars keep the conversation alive by asking how Ren can protect the environment, how Li can shape online behavior, and how the 5 relationships can be rethought for democratic societies. The dialogue between ancient teachings and today's challenges keeps Confucian ethics relevant. When you sit down with a friend, share a meal, or work on a team project, you are already practicing the basics of Confucian thought. By remembering to be kind, to follow simple rules that respect others, and to see your role as part of a larger web, you contribute to social harmony. That is the lasting gift of Confucius. A simple guide for living well together, one small act at a time. Zen is a branch of Buddhism that grew in China and later moved to Japan. It started with a monk named Bodhidharma. He is said to have walked to a temple in the north of China and then sat in a cave for 9 years, staring at a wall. He did not talk about scriptures or rules. He told his students that the real teaching is a direct look at the mind. He said, "A special transmission outside the scriptures. No reliance on words and letters." This short line sums up the core idea of Zen. It is about seeing for yourself, not just reading a book. The next big name in Zen is Dogen, a Japanese monk from the 13th century. Dogen wrote a collection of talks called Shobogenzo. In one passage he wrote, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." Dogen liked to sit for long periods in meditation called zazen. He believed that the act of sitting itself is the practice, not a step towards something else. For Dogen, every breath, every movement is a chance to see the mind clearly. Zen puts a lot of weight on direct experience. Think of a child learning to ride a bike. The child does not read a manual. The child does not follow a long list of steps. The child gets on the bike, pushes off, feels the balance shift, And then, after a few tries, the child suddenly knows how to stay upright. That sudden moment of knowing is called satori in Zen. It is a flash of insight that comes without a long explanation. The child's experience is the same kind of flash that a Zen student hopes for when working with a koan. A koan is a short story or question that seems puzzling. It is not meant to be solved with logic. One famous koan is the sound of one hand clapping. A monk asks, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" If you try to answer with words, you get stuck. The point is to push the mind beyond ordinary thinking. When the mind lets go of the need for a logical answer, a glimpse of the true nature of mind can appear. This is the kind of insight Zen teachers call satori. Another well-known koan is the story of the flower sermon. The Buddha was once giving a talk. He held up a single flower. The monks looked at him, but none understood. One monk, Mahakasyapa, simply smiled. The Buddha said, "I have the true teaching, and it is transmitted to this monk." The flower itself became the message. No words were needed. This story shows how Zen values a direct, word-free transmission. It also shows how a simple gesture can carry a deep meaning. Zen practice often centers on seated meditation, called zazen. The posture is simple. Sit on a cushion, keep the back straight, place the hands in a cosmic mudra, and look at a spot on the floor. The breath is the anchor. A common exercise is to count each inhalation and exhalation up to 10, then start again. This helps the mind stay in the present moment. You can try a short version now. Sit comfortably, close your eyes, and breathe in slowly through the nose. Feel the air fill your belly. Then breathe out gently. Do this for a minute or two. You will notice how the mind settles. This simple breathing practice is a daily way to keep a Zen attitude. The everyday use of Zen has spread far beyond the monastery walls. In modern times, teachers like Thich Nhat Hanh have taken Zen ideas and turned them into mindfulness practices for schools, hospitals, and workplaces. People use the breathing exercise to calm nerves before a test or a meeting. They use the idea of just being here to handle stress. In therapy, mindfulness helps clients notice thoughts without getting trapped by them. In the corporate world, leaders teach brief meditation breaks to improve focus and teamwork. All these uses trace back to the Zen focus on direct experience and present moment awareness. Even though Zen is popular today, some people raise concerns. One criticism is that Zen can feel too cryptic for beginners. The koans are puzzling, and the lack of clear explanations can leave newcomers frustrated. A new student may sit for weeks and feel no progress, wondering if they are doing it wrong. This can make Zen seem like a secret club that only a few can enter. Teachers try to help by giving guidance, but the core idea remains that the insight must come from inside, not from a teacher's words. This can be a steep hill for someone just starting out. A second criticism is that Zen may ignore social responsibilities. Because Zen stresses personal awakening and letting go of concepts, some argue that it can lead people to withdraw from the world. In history, there have been monks who spent all day in the meditation hall and paid little attention to the suffering around them. Critics say that a practice that focuses on inner peace should also include caring for others, working for justice, and helping the community. Modern Zen teachers often address this by adding engaged Buddhism, which blends meditation with social action. The roots of Zen are still firmly planted in early Buddhist teachings. The Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths. Life has suffering, suffering has a cause, it can end, and there is a path to end it. Zen takes the last part, the path, and shortens it to direct experience. Instead of a long list of steps, Zen says that the path can be seen in a single moment of clear seeing. This link to the original Buddhist aim keeps Zen from being a completely separate tradition. It is a way of practicing the Buddha's core message in a very immediate form. When we look at modern interpretations, we see Zen blending with science. Researchers study how brief meditation changes brain activity. They find that even a few minutes of focused breathing can lower stress hormones and improve attention. These findings give a new language to the old Zen claim that sitting still can calm the mind. Some tech companies have built apps that guide users through short Zen sessions. The apps often use a gentle voice, a timer, and a simple instruction like watch your breath. The goal is the same as Dogen's: to sit, breathe, and notice. Another modern twist is the use of Zen in sports. Athletes talk about being in the zone, a state where they act without overthinking. This is much like the Zen idea of acting without attachment to thoughts. A runner may focus on the rhythm of each step, letting the mind stay quiet. The runner's experience mirrors the Zen practice of staying present while moving. In both cases, the body does the work and the mind simply watches. Let's just return to the child on a bike. The child does not ask a teacher for a rule about balance. The child feels the wobble, feels the push, and learns. This story shows how a direct, lived experience can be more powerful than any lecture. Zen teachers use this picture to remind students that the true teaching is not in a book, but in the act of doing. When you sit, breathe, and notice, you are doing the practice. When you smile at the flower, you are seeing the teaching. The flower sermon also gives us a simple image to hold. Imagine a teacher holding a bright blossom. The students look for a lesson in words. One student simply smiles. The smile says, "I see it." The lesson is that sometimes the deepest truth does not need an explanation. It is already there, waiting to be seen. This story is told in many Zen lineages and is often used to introduce the idea that words can block the view. The sound of one hand clapping is a koan that many students remember. When you first hear it, you may try to make a sound with one hand, or you may think about silence. The point is not to find a clever answer, but to let the mind stop trying to solve it with logic. When the mind lets go, a quiet knowing can appear. Some teachers say that the answer is simply the sound of one hand clapping is the sound of the mind letting go. It is a reminder that the answer is not a sound, but a shift in how we think. Zen also talks about no mind, a state where thoughts come and go without grabbing hold. This is similar to what modern psychologists call flow. When you are fully absorbed in an activity, you are not labeling each thought. You are just doing. Zen practice trains this ability through zazen and through everyday tasks like washing dishes. When you wash dishes, you can focus on the feeling of warm water, the sound of the plates, and the motion of your hands. This simple act becomes a meditation. It shows how Zen can be lived in daily life, not just in a quiet room. The practice of zazen also includes a set of guidelines called the 5 precepts. These are basic moral rules. Do not kill, do not steal, do not lie, do not misuse sex, and do not take intoxicants. While Zen emphasizes direct experience, it still respects these ethical foundations. The precepts keep the mind clear and help the practitioner stay grounded. This counters the criticism that Zen ignores social duties. By keeping to the precepts, a Zen student stays aware of how their actions affect others. In the history of Zen, there are many stories of masters who used simple acts to teach. One tale tells of a master who poured tea for a visitor. He kept pouring even after the cup was full, and the tea spilled over. The visitor shouted, "Stop!" The master smiled and said, "Your mind is like this cup. It is already full of ideas. You must empty it before you can receive new insight." This story shows how a small, everyday act can become a lesson about letting go of preconceptions. Another anecdote comes from the Japanese monk Hakuin. He was known for his intense training. One day he was walking in a garden and saw a small stone. He picked it up, stared at it, and then shouted, "The stone is the Buddha." He then laughed. Hakuin wanted to show that any ordinary object can become a doorway to insight if we look at it with fresh eyes. This ties back to the idea that Zen sees the sacred in the simple. Zen's influence has reached the West in many ways. The beat poets of the 1950s, like Jack Kerouac, read Zen texts and wrote about being present. Their work helped spread Zen ideas to a wider audience. Later, teachers like Shunryu Suzuki opened Zen centers in America. Suzuki's book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, uses plain language to explain the practice. He says, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind there are few." This line captures the Zen value of staying open, like a child on a bike who has not yet learned the rules. Modern Zen also appears in education. Some schools now have short mindfulness breaks. Children sit for a few minutes, breathe, and notice how they feel. Teachers report that the children become calmer and can focus better after the break. This practice is a direct line from Dogen's emphasis on sitting and breathing. It shows how a centuries-old tradition can help today's students. When we think about how Zen fits into the larger Buddhist picture, we see that it is one path among many. The Buddha taught the middle way, a balanced approach between self-indulgence and self-mortification. Zen takes the part of the middle way that says we can see the truth in the present moment. It does not reject other practices like chanting or study, but it puts them in the background. The emphasis is on the here and now. Looking ahead, the next part of our series will move from Zen's focus on direct experience to the broader Indian ideas about the nature of reality. Hindu metaphysics asks big questions about what the world really is, about the self, and about the ultimate reality called Brahman. While Zen says the answer is found in a single moment of clear seeing, Hindu thought builds a detailed map of the cosmos. We will see how the two traditions talk to each other, where they agree and where they differ. To bring the ideas together, remember the child on the bike, the flower sermon, the sound of one hand, and the simple breath. These images show how Zen turns everyday life into a chance for insight. The practice is not hidden in a distant monastery. It lives in the kitchen, in the park, in a classroom. By sitting, breathing, and staying open, we can catch a glimpse of the mind's true nature. That glimpse is the heart of Zen, and it is the bridge that leads us toward the next chapter of our journey into Eastern philosophy. Imagine we sit together in a quiet room, a single lamp glowing in the dark. That lamp is like the idea of Brahman in Hindu thought. It is the light that fills every corner, even the places we cannot see. It is not a thing we can hold, but it is the source of all light. When the lamp is on, we can read, we can move, we can feel safe. In the same way, Brahman is the ultimate reality that holds everything together. It is the ground of all being, the source of all that exists. Now think of a mirror on a table. When you look at the mirror, you see your own face reflected back. The mirror does not create the face, it only shows what is already there. That mirror picture is like the idea of Atman, the inner self. Atman is the true nature inside each of us. It is not the body, not the clothes, not the thoughts that come and go. It is the part that can see the lamp of Brahman shining. When we look inside, we see that our inner self is a reflection of that same light. The words Brahman and Atman first appear in the oldest Indian texts, the Upanishads, which are part of the Vedic tradition. In the Chandogya Upanishad, we hear the line Tat Tham Asi, which means that you are. It is a short way of saying that the inner self is not separate from the ultimate reality. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, we find Aham Brahmasmi, or I am Brahman. Both of these statements try to show a deep link between the lamp and the mirror, between the world outside and the self inside. One of the most famous teachers who wrote about this link was Adi Shankara, who lived in the 8th century. Shankara taught a view called Advaita, which means non-dual. For Shankara, there is only one reality, Brahman, and everything else is like a dream or an illusion. He used the analogy of a rope that looks like a snake in dim light. When the light gets brighter, we see the rope for what it really is. In his view, the mirror image of the self is not a separate thing. The Atman is simply Brahman seen through a fog of ignorance. He wrote, Brahman is the only truth. The world is unreal, and there is no second. Ramanuja, who lived a few centuries after Shankara, offered a different picture. He called his view Vishishtadvaita, which means qualified non-dual. He agreed that Brahman is the ultimate reality, but he said that the world and the self are real parts of Brahman, like leaves on a tree. The lamp still shines, but the light also passes through many different panes. For Ramanuja, Atman is a distinct spark that lives inside Brahman, yet it never becomes separate. He wrote, Brahman is the whole, and the souls and the world are his body. In his commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita, he says that the soul can see Brahman, but it also has its own shape and purpose. The debate between these two teachers is an old story that still gets told in Indian philosophy classes. It is said that Shankara and Ramanuja once met in a forest hermitage. Shankara held up a lamp and said, When the lamp is lit, the darkness disappears. That is what Brahman does. Ramanuja smiled and placed a mirror in front of the lamp. He said, The lamp lights the mirror, but the mirror still shows a picture. The picture is real, even though it depends on the lamp. Their discussion went on for days, with each side using stories, verses, and logic. The story shows how two great minds can look at the same lamp and still see different things. To see how these ideas work in everyday life, think of a student who feels anxious about an exam. The lamp of Brahman is the calm that underlies all thoughts. When the student takes a deep breath and remembers that the inner self is not the fleeting worry, but a deeper steadiness, the lamp can shine into the mind. The mirror shows that the student's true nature is not the nervous feeling, but a quiet presence that can watch the feeling pass. In this way, the concepts of Brahman and Atman can help people find peace in stressful moments. Another example comes from a farmer who works the land. The farmer sees the rain, the soil, the crops, and knows that each season brings change. When he looks at the sky and feels a sense of awe, He is touching the lamp of Brahman that fills the whole world. At the same time, when he looks at his own hands, he sees the Atman, the inner spark that allows him to act. He can understand his work as part of a larger flow, rather than just a daily grind. Even though these ideas sound beautiful, some people argue that they are too far away from daily life. One criticism says that talking about a lamp that fills the whole universe does not help a person pay the rent or feed a child. The critic worries that the language is too abstract, and that people might spend time thinking about the lamp instead of solving real problems. Another criticism says that if everything is already Brahman and nothing can change, then we might fall into a kind of fatalism. If the world is an illusion, why try to improve it? Why care about right and wrong? These worries have been raised by many thinkers over the centuries. The first criticism can be answered by pointing to the many stories in the Upanishads where seekers use simple practices to feel the lamp. For example, the sage Yajnavalkya asked his wife, "What is the self?" She answered, "It is not the body, not the breath, not the mind." He then sat under a tree, closed his eyes, and felt the stillness inside. That stillness is the Atman, and it can be felt even while the body works. So the ideas are not just lofty words. They can be felt in a quiet moment. The second criticism about fatalism is also met by many teachers. Shankara said that ignorance is what makes us think the world is unreal. When ignorance is gone, we see that actions still matter, because they are expressions of Brahman. Ramanuja added that each soul has a role in the divine play, and that fulfilling one's duties is a way of honoring the lamp. Both teachers say that understanding the deeper reality does not remove responsibility, but gives it a clearer purpose. The myth of the cosmic egg, called Hiranyagarbha, gives a vivid picture of how Brahman first appeared. The story says that in the beginning, there was a golden egg floating in the void. Inside the egg was the first spark of light, the seed of all creation. When the egg cracked open, the light poured out and formed the world. This image helps us see Brahman as the source that spreads out like light from a single point. The egg is not a physical object, but a symbol for the hidden potential that becomes everything. The discussion of self in Buddhism offers a useful contrast. Buddhism famously teaches the idea of anatta, which means no self. Buddhist teachers say that the sense of a permanent inner self is a mistake. They argue that what we call Atman is just a collection of changing parts. The Buddhist view pushes us to see everything as a flow, without a fixed core. Hindu philosophers like Shankara responded by saying that the true self is not a fixed thing, but the unchanging awareness that sees the flow. The debate between self and no self has shaped Indian thought for centuries, and it shows how the lamp and mirror ideas have been tested against other traditions. To bring the ideas back to a modern setting, think about a person using a smartphone. The phone's screen can be bright like a lamp, showing information, connecting us to the world. Yet the phone also reflects the user's attention, like a mirror. When we scroll mindlessly, we may feel empty, as if the lamp's light is wasted. But if we use the screen to learn, to connect with loved ones, we let the lamp's light fill a purpose. The same can be said about the inner self. When we notice the mind's chatter and gently bring attention back to the breath, we are using the mirror to see the lamp inside. In recent years, scholars have tried to bring these ancient ideas into science. Some compare Brahman to the concept of a field in physics, an invisible force that gives particles their properties. Others see Atman as similar to the sense of consciousness that scientists are still trying to explain. While the comparisons are not exact, They show that the lamp and mirror images can still spark curiosity today. Let us hear a short quote from Shankara's commentary on the Brahma Sutras. "When the mind sees the lamp, it forgets the darkness." This line captures the feeling that once we recognize the ultimate reality, the worries that cloud us lose their grip. From Ramanuja's work we have the line, "The soul is the lamp, the body is the oil that feeds it." He uses the image of oil to show that the world is not separate, but helps the light shine. Both quotes are easy to remember, and they give a quick way to recall the core ideas. Now, imagine a child playing with a flashlight in a dark room. When the child points the light at the wall, a bright spot appears. The child can move the light around, making different shapes appear. The light is like Brahman, always present, ready to illuminate. The child's hand that holds the flashlight is like Atman, the part that can move the light. If the child covers the flashlight, the room stays dark, but the light is still inside the bulb, waiting to be let out. This simple scene helps us see how the inner self can bring the ultimate reality into our everyday world. Another story comes from the ancient poet Vedavyasa, who wrote about a king who asked his sages, "What is the true nature of the world?" The sages answered, "It is like a dream. When you wake, you see the lamp of truth." The king was puzzled, because he lived in a palace full of gold and power. Yet when he retired to a quiet garden and watched the sunrise, he felt a peace that no treasure could buy. He realized that the lamp of Brahman was always there, even in his palace, but he had been looking at the walls instead of the light. This anecdote shows how the ideas can move from theory to personal experience. The link between the lamp and the mirror also appears in the practice of yoga. In the first stage of yoga, called yama, we learn to keep the body clean and the mind calm. In the later stage, nidharana, we focus attention on a single point, often imagined as a flame. When the mind steadies, the flame appears brighter, and the practitioner feels a sense of unity with the light. This practice mirrors the philosophical claim that focusing on the inner self reveals the ultimate reality. In the same way, the practice of Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, asks the seeker to ask, "Who am I?" By repeatedly questioning the identity of the self, the seeker eventually sees that the answer is not the name, the job, or the body, but the still awareness behind all thoughts. This is the Atman, the mirror that reflects the lamp. The seeker may feel a moment of great clarity, like a sudden flash of light in a dark room. If we look at the history of Indian thought, we see that the ideas of Brahman and Atman grew out of earlier Vedic rituals. The early Vedic hymns praised many gods, each with a role in the world. Over time, philosophers began to ask deeper questions. Who is behind all the gods? What is the true source of the chants and sacrifices? The Upanishads answered by pointing to a single reality, Brahman, that underlies all the deities. The inner self, Atman, was then seen as the part of each person that can know that reality. This shift from many gods to one ultimate reality is a key turning point in Indian philosophy. The debate about the self also reached the south of India, where the Tamil poet Saint Ramanuja wrote devotional poems that mixed love for a personal God with the idea that the soul is part of the divine. He used everyday images like a child's love for a mother to explain how the soul can be close to Brahman while still keeping its own shape. His verses still inspire people who sing in temples today. In modern times, the ideas have traveled far beyond India. Teachers like Swami Vivekananda spoke about Brahman and Atman at the Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago in 1893. He said, "You have the same spark of divinity as the sun, and you can shine it out. His words helped many Western listeners see the lamp and mirror ideas as a way to find inner strength. Even today, people use the terms Brahman and Atman in therapy and mindfulness groups. A therapist might ask a client to notice the part of themselves that watches thoughts, rather than getting lost in them. That watching part is described as Atman. When the client feels a sense of calm, they can say they have touched the lamp of Brahman inside. The language gives a simple map for inner work. Let us return to the two counter-arguments for a moment. The first says the ideas are too abstract. To meet this, we can point to the many simple stories: the lamp and the mirror, the flashlight, the child, the farmer, the student. Each of these shows how the big ideas can be lived in small moments. The second says the ideas can lead to fatalism. The stories of Shankara and Ramanuja show that both teachers stressed action. Shankara said that knowing the truth frees us to act without selfish desire. Ramanuja said that each soul has a role in the divine play, and that duty is a way to honor the lamp. Both say that understanding does not stop us from caring, but gives us a clearer reason to care. A final quote from the Bhagavad Gita, spoken by Krishna, helps tie everything together. When a man sees the self in all beings and all beings in the self, he never feels any loss. This line reminds us that the lamp shines on everyone and the mirror reflects everyone. It is a call to see the world as a family of reflections, each holding a piece of the same light. In closing, think of the lamp again. It does not need a special room. It can sit on a table in any house. It does not need a fancy switch. A simple match can light it. The mirror does not need a perfect surface. Even a cracked glass can still show a picture. The ideas of Brahman and Atman are like those objects. They are simple in their shape, yet they point to something vast. When we sit together, sip coffee, and talk about them, we are turning on the lamp and looking into the mirror. In that quiet moment, we can feel the same light that has been shining for thousands of years, and we can see that the inner self is not separate from that light. The ancient stories, the modern examples, the debates of Shankara and Ramanuja all become part of our own small room, lit by the same lamp, reflected in the same mirror. When we sit down with a cup of tea and think about ideas, it can feel a bit like cooking. You have a pot, you have spices, you have heat. If you add a pinch of salt, a dash of pepper, a spoon of sugar, you get a flavor that is new, but still made of the same ingredients. The same thing happens when ideas from the East and the West meet. They mix, they change, they create something fresh. In this part of the talk, we will compare a few key ideas. Look at the people who first noticed the links, and see how those links have been used in everyday life. We will also hear two stories about how the meeting of ideas has happened in history. And we will hear two reasons why some people think we should be careful about mixing too much. Let us start with the idea of change. The Chinese philosopher Laozi, the founder of Taoism, wrote about the Tao as a river that flows without stopping. He said that the wise person moves with the flow, not against it. In a short line he writes, "The Tao is like a river that never stops moving." A few thousand years later, a Greek thinker named Heraclitus said almost the same thing. He wrote, "No man ever steps in the same river twice." Both of them are pointing to the fact that everything is always moving, that nothing stays the same for long. The comparison is simple. A river is a river, whether you call it Tao or simply a river. The lesson is that we should not cling to fixed ideas. We should be ready to adapt. Now think about impermanence. In Buddhism, the word anicca means that all things are temporary. The Buddha taught, All conditioned things are impermanent. That means that anything we build, any feeling we have, any thought we think, will eventually fade. In the West, a similar feeling shows up in the work of the Scottish philosopher David Hume. He wrote, "All the objects of human reason are, in the first place, the objects of the senses." For Hume, our ideas are built on what we see, hear, touch, and those sensory experiences are always changing. If what we see today disappears tomorrow, the ideas built on them also change. Both traditions tell us that we should not treat anything as solid forever. The similarity helps us see that the fear of loss is a human problem, not a cultural one. Another point of contact is the way each tradition looks at the self. In Taoism, there is a concept called Wu Wei, which means non-action or effortless action. It suggests that the self should not force things, but should align with the natural order. In Western thought, the Stoics like Epictetus said something close. It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. Both say that the mind should not try to dominate the world, but should accept what comes and respond calmly. The overlap is useful when we try to handle stress. If we see the mind as a driver who tries to control every turn, we get anxious. If we see the mind as a passenger who watches the road, we feel lighter. Even the way we think about knowledge shows a bridge. Buddhist monks practice a kind of meditation that lets them see how thoughts appear and disappear. This practice is called vipassana, or insight meditation. The goal is to watch the mind as a clear sky, noticing clouds of thought without getting stuck. In the West, the ancient skeptics like Pyrrho asked, "Can we ever know anything for sure?" They suggested that we should suspend judgment and just observe. Both approaches teach us to step back from our own opinions and watch them pass. The result is a calmer mind that does not cling to false certainty. Modern scholars have taken these parallels and written about them. The British writer Alan Watts liked to point out that the Zen idea of no mind sounded a lot like the Western idea of mindfulness that later psychologists would study. He said, "When you stop trying to be something, you are already what you are." Another scholar, the American philosopher Robert Pirsig, in his book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, used the road trip as a picture of how ideas travel. He wrote about a rider who stops in different towns, each town offering a new view of the same road. That picture fits well with how Eastern and Western ideas stop in each other's cultures, each time adding a new view. Imagine a road trip across a country. You start in a small town, you drive a few miles, you stop at a diner, you talk to the people there, you pick up a new story. Then you drive on, stop in another town, hear another story, maybe a different language. At the end of the trip you have a map that shows many places, each with its own flavor. The map is richer because you visited many spots. That is what happens when a philosopher in Europe reads a Chinese text, or when a monk in Japan hears a poem from America. Each stop adds a new line to the map of thought. A kitchen metaphor works the same way. Suppose you want to bake a cake. You need flour, sugar, eggs, butter, and a pinch of salt. If you add a spice from another country, say cardamom from India, the cake gets a new taste. The cake is still a cake, but the flavor is different. If you keep adding more spices, you might end up with a pastry that no one can call a simple cake anymore. The same risk exists when we compare ideas. Adding a Taoist idea to a Western discussion can make the conversation richer, but if we add too many details without care, the original meaning can get lost. One story that shows how ideas travel is the translation of the Bhagavad Gita into English in the late 1700s. A man named Charles Wilkins, who worked for the British East India Company, learned Sanskrit and spent years turning the ancient Indian poem into English prose. When his translation appeared in 1785, it opened a door for European thinkers. The German philosopher Schopenhauer read the Gita and said it helped shape his view of the world as a place of will and representation. The translation acted like a spice that entered a new kitchen, changing the taste of European philosophy. It also showed how a careful translation can keep the original flavor while letting new cooks use it. Another anecdote comes from the world of poetry. In the 1950s and 60s, a group of American poets started reading Zen stories and koans. A koan is a short, puzzling story meant to break ordinary thinking. The poet Allen Ginsberg wrote, "The sound of the wind in the trees is the same as the sound of my mind when I am awake." He was borrowing the Zen idea that ordinary sounds can become a doorway to deeper awareness. The poet Gary Snyder, who spent time in Japan studying with Zen masters, brought the practice of sitting meditation into the American literary scene. Their poems began to read like a quiet garden, where each line was a stone placed carefully. This shows how a cultural exchange can spark new art forms, just as a new spice can spark a new dish. Even though the connections are exciting, some thinkers warn us to be careful. The first caution is that comparing traditions can flatten out their differences. When we say Taoist flow is like Heraclitus change, we might forget that Taoism also includes ideas about harmony with nature, about the role of the ruler, and about the value of simplicity. Heraclitus, on the other hand, was a pre-Socratic who focused on logos, the rational principle that orders change. If we only keep the part about change, we lose the rest. The danger is that we end up with a caricature, a picture that looks simple, but is not the full story. A second warning is about cultural borrowing. When ideas move across borders, they can be stripped of the context that gave them meaning. Take the popular use of the word karma in everyday speech. In Buddhism, karma is a complex law of cause and effect that involves intention, ethical quality, and rebirth. In modern pop culture, it is often reduced to "what goes around comes around," a simple moral slogan. The original depth is lost, and the word becomes a spice that tastes sweet but has no nutrition. The same can happen with concepts like mindfulness. When a corporation sells mindfulness apps, the practice can become a tool for productivity rather than a path to insight. The risk is that we take a deep idea, sprinkle it on a surface, and forget why it mattered in the first place. To see how these ideas work in daily life, let us look at a few practical examples. First, consider the way many people now talk about flow in work. The psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi used the word to describe a state where a person is fully absorbed in an activity. He borrowed the term from the Taoist notion of moving with the river. When a carpenter builds a chair and feels the wood guiding his hands, he is in flow. He is not forcing the wood, but listening to it. That example shows how an Eastern image can help Western science explain a feeling. Second, think about the practice of skeptical inquiry in science. Modern scientists often repeat experiments to see if results hold up. This habit mirrors the Buddhist practice of testing one's own mind by observing thoughts repeatedly. When a scientist watches a reaction change over time, she is doing what the Buddha suggested, watching the impermanent nature of phenomena. The similarity helps us understand that the method of looking, waiting, and noting is not limited to any one culture. When we compare ideas, we also find cross-references that deepen our view. The Indian concept of Maya, meaning illusion, can be linked to the Western idea of appearance versus reality that Plato explored in his allegory of the cave. Both point to the gap between what we see and what is truly there. The Chinese notion of Ren or humaneness resonates with the Aristotelian idea of phronesis, practical wisdom that guides moral action. By tracing these threads, we can see a web of thought that stretches across continents. Let us bring in a quote from the Greek skeptic Sextus Empiricus. "We must suspend judgment, for we cannot be sure of anything." This line echoes the Buddhist teaching that we should not cling to any view as final. The echo is not exact, but the rhythm is similar. It shows that the habit of questioning is a human habit, not a cultural one. From the Taoist side, Laozi also says, "The soft overcomes the hard." This line can be compared with the Western idea from the philosopher Thomas Hobbes that cunning is the weapon of the weak. Both suggest that gentle strategies can win over forceful ones. The comparison helps us think about conflict resolution in a new light. In the modern world, scholars like the comparative philosopher Jain Mohanty have written about how Buddhist ideas of interdependence influence environmental ethics in the West. He points out that the Buddhist view that all things are linked can support the Western idea of ecological responsibility. This shows that the meeting of ideas can help solve real problems, not just stay in the realm of theory. Another contemporary voice is the philosopher Michael Sandel, who talks about the limits of markets. He has cited the Confucian idea that some things are sacred and should not be bought. By bringing the Eastern notion into a Western debate about money, he shows how a spice from another kitchen can change the flavor of a policy discussion. Now let us return to the kitchen metaphor for a moment. Imagine you are making a soup. You start with water and vegetables. Then you add a pinch of ginger, a splash of soy sauce, a sprinkle of pepper. Each addition changes the taste, but you still recognize the base vegetables. If you add too much soy sauce, the soup becomes salty and you lose the vegetable flavor. The same happens when we bring in ideas. A little bit of Taoist thought can freshen a Western argument about change. Too much, and the original Western point may be hidden. The art is to balance the ingredients. The road trip picture also reminds us that each stop is a chance to rest, to refuel, to talk. When a philosopher stops in a new town, he or she may pick up a local story that reshapes the journey. The journey does not erase the places already visited. It adds layers. In the same way, when a Western thinker reads a Zen koan, the koan does not replace his logical training. It adds a pause, a moment of wonder. The journey continues, richer. Let us examine a concrete case of how a Buddhist idea entered Western psychology. The practice of mindful breathing is now taught in many schools to help children focus. This practice comes from the Buddhist meditation on the breath called nana. In the original context, the breath is a doorway to seeing the mind's habits. In the classroom, teachers use it as a simple tool to calm nerves. The core technique stays the same. Notice the breath, let thoughts pass. The purpose shifts, but the method remains. This shows that an idea can travel and still work, even if the setting changes. Another example is the influence of the Taoist concept of Wu Wei on modern leadership training. Business coaches often tell executives to lead by letting go, meaning they should create conditions where teams can act on their own. This advice mirrors the Taoist line, "The best ruler is one whose presence is barely felt." Both suggest that the most effective guide is the one who does not force. When a manager adopts this style, the workplace can feel more like a flowing river than a dam. We have now looked at several points of contact: change, impermanence, self, knowledge, ethics, and practical techniques. Each pair shows a line that runs across the map of thought. The line is not always straight, but it is there. When we see it, we can learn from both sides. At the same time, we should keep the two counter-arguments in mind. First, we must avoid flattening the traditions. When we say Buddhist impermanence is like Greek skepticism, we must also remember that Buddhism includes a path to liberation, while Greek skepticism often ends in a suspension of belief without a clear practice. Second, we must watch out for dilution. When a popular book takes a Zen story and turns it into a self-help slogan, the depth can disappear. The story may still be beautiful, but the lesson may be shallow. To close, let us think of the kitchen again. A chef who respects each spice knows where it comes from, how it was grown, how it should be used. He does not throw the spice in without thought. He tastes, he adjusts, he respects the balance. In the same way, a thinker who mixes East and West should read the original text, understand the culture, and then decide how to use the idea. That respect keeps the flavor true while still allowing new dishes to be created. And think of the road trip again. The traveler who stops at each town, talks to the locals, learns the history, and writes down the names of the places, creates a journal that honors each stop. He does not erase the towns he passed. He carries them all in his memory. In philosophy, we can keep a journal of ideas, noting where each thought came from and how it changed us. By doing that, we honor both the East and the West. In the end, the meeting of ideas is a chance to see the world from more angles. It can help us handle change, accept impermanence, act with humility, and think more clearly. It can also make our conversations richer, like a soup that has the right amount of spice. As we move forward, let us keep the kitchen and the road in mind. Let us add spices with care and stop at each town with curiosity. In that way, we can enjoy a feast of thought that is both tasty and nourishing. When we first talked about the roots of Eastern thought, we looked at how meditation, compassion, and the idea of balance shape daily life. We saw how a simple breath can calm the mind, how a kind word can keep a community together, and how the idea of right action can guide a person's choices. Now let us step out of the ancient temples and into the streets, the offices, and the kitchens of today. In this part, we will see how those old ideas show up in the apps on our phones, the yoga mats in studios, and the policies of companies that try to do good. We will hear from teachers like Thich Nhat Hanh, from scientists who measure the brain, and from everyday people who try a small habit and feel a change. We will also hear the doubts that some people raise that the modern versions may be too shallow or just a passing fad. By the end, you will have a clear picture of how to bring a tiny piece of Eastern practice into your own day. First, let us look at the most visible sign of the shift: mindfulness apps. When you open an app that guides you through a 5-minute breathing session, you are doing something that Buddhist monks have done for centuries. The app may ask you to notice the rise and fall of each breath, to let thoughts come and go without judging them. In the language of the old teachers, this is called mindful awareness. The modern wording makes it sound like a simple tool you can press a button to use. Yet the core idea stays the same. Pay attention to the present moment and do it with kindness. One of the first researchers to study this in a lab was Dr. Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin. He used brain scans to compare people who meditated regularly with those who did not. He found that the meditators had stronger activity in the part of the brain that handles positive emotions. He wrote, "Training the mind can change the brain." This line echoes the old Buddhist claim that the mind is not fixed but can be shaped. The science gives us a modern way to see that the practice does more than feel good. It actually rewires how we react to stress. Another modern doorway is the yoga studio. Yoga began as a set of physical and spiritual practices in ancient India. In a studio, you may see a class that starts with a few minutes of quiet breathing, moves into a series of postures, and ends with a short meditation. The postures stretch the body, but the breath and the focus keep the mind steady. The teacher may say, "Stay present in each pose." That is the same reminder that the Buddha gave his followers. Keep your mind where your body is, not lost in worries. Yoga also carries the idea of ahimsa, a Sanskrit word meaning non-violence. In modern studios, many teachers talk about kindness to oneself. When a student can touch their toes, the teacher might say, "It's okay. Just notice the feeling and keep breathing." This gentle approach mirrors the compassion taught by Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen master who wrote, "When you love someone, the best thing you can give them is your presence." In a yoga class, the presence of the teacher, the presence of each student, creates a small community of care. Ethical business models are another place where Eastern ideas have taken root. Companies like Patagonia, Whole Foods, and many tech start-ups talk about purpose over profit. They try to balance making money with caring for people and the planet. This balance is a direct echo of the Taoist concept of the middle way, which says that the best path is one that avoids extremes. In practice, a company might set a policy that all employees get a meditation break each day, or that a portion of profits go to environmental projects. The goal is to weave mindfulness and compassion into the daily flow of work. One modern teacher who bridges the gap between ancient practice and everyday life is Thich Nhat Hanh. He often used simple language that anyone could understand. He said, "Walk as if you are kissing the earth with your feet." This line invites us to turn a regular walk into a practice of gratitude and attention. If you walk to the bus stop, you can notice the feel of each step, the sound of birds, the smell of fresh coffee. When you bring that awareness, the walk becomes a moving meditation, not just a way to get somewhere. Let us try a concrete example. Imagine you are on a daily walk to the grocery store. Instead of scrolling on your phone, you decide to practice mindful walking for 10 minutes. You start by feeling the ground under each foot. You notice the rhythm of your breath. When a car passes, you simply note the sound and let it go. When a thought about an upcoming meeting appears, you label it thinking and bring your focus back to the step. After a few minutes, you may feel a lightness in your chest, a sense that you have already taken a break from the rush. This small habit can lower stress and improve focus for the rest of the day. A second everyday habit is the family dinner. In many Eastern cultures, the dinner table is a place for harmony and respect. The practice of right speech, speaking truthfully, kindly, and at the right time, can be tried at each meal. You might start by setting a rule: no phones on the table. Then each person shares one thing that went well that day, and one thing that was hard. The goal is not to solve every problem, but to listen with an open heart. This mirrors the Confucian idea of ili, which means proper conduct in social settings. By practicing respect at the dinner table, you bring a piece of ancient wisdom into a modern home. Now let us hear the voices of those who worry that the modern versions are losing the depth of the original teachings. One common criticism is that the commercialized mindfulness products water down the practice. A critic may point out that a 5-minute guided session on a phone cannot replace years of disciplined meditation under a teacher's guidance. They say the focus on quick stress relief turns a deep spiritual path into a self-help trick. This argument is not new. In the 1960s, when yoga first came to the West, some teachers warned that studios that offered only the physical postures missed the philosophical core. The same concern appears today with mindfulness. A second counter-argument is that these trends may be fleeting. The popularity of Mindful Mondays or Wellness Weeks can rise and fall like a fashion. Critics note that when a practice is packaged as a product, it can become a status symbol rather than a lasting change. They ask whether people will keep the habit once the hype fades. This doubt reminds us of a story from ancient China. The philosopher Zhuangzi told of a man who tried to catch a fish with a net made of silk. The net was beautiful, but it broke easily, and the fish slipped away. The lesson was that a fragile tool cannot hold what is alive. In the same way, a fragile trend may not hold the living practice. To see how these concerns play out in real life, let us look at 2 anecdotes. The first is the rise of mindfulness in schools. In the early 2000s, a small elementary school in Massachusetts decided to add a 10-minute breathing exercise at the start of each day. The teacher, Ms. Patel, noticed that the children were calmer and could focus better on reading. Word spread, and soon the district adopted a program called Mindup. By 2020, thousands of schools across the United States used similar routines. Some researchers reported that students who practiced mindfulness showed higher scores on attention tests. Yet not everyone was happy. Some parents argued that the program introduced religious ideas into public schools. The debate continues, showing both the promise and the tension that comes with bringing ancient practice into a modern system. The second anecdote involves veganism inspired by Buddhist compassion. In the 1990s, a group of Buddhist monks in Thailand began to speak out against the suffering of animals in the meat trade. Their teachings emphasized karu, the Sanskrit word for compassion. A young chef named Ananda heard the monks' words while traveling in Thailand. He returned to his hometown in Canada and opened a plant-based restaurant that highlighted the link between food choices and kindness. The restaurant quickly attracted people who wanted to eat healthily and ethically, even if they were not Buddhist. Over the years, the idea spread, and today many people choose vegan diets because they feel it aligns with a compassionate outlook. This story shows how a spiritual principle can travel across cultures and become a lifestyle choice for many. These 2 stories also show how the old ideas can adapt without losing their heart. In the school example, the practice was stripped of any religious language and kept as a simple focus on breath. In the vegan story, the core value of compassion was kept, but the form, a modern restaurant, changed. Both illustrate the flexibility that the ancient teachings themselves talked about. The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent." He meant the ways we practice can shift as long as the intention stays clear. Let us now bring in a few more modern voices. Dr. Sarah Lazar, a neuroscientist at Harvard, studied long-term meditation practitioners using MRI scans. She found that their brains had thicker regions associated with attention and emotional regulation. She wrote, "The mind can be trained, and the changes are visible. Her work supports the claim that regular practice, even in a modern setting, can have lasting effects. Another researcher, Dr. Amishi Jha, looked at soldiers in high-stress environments. She showed that a short mindfulness training helped them stay focused under fire. These studies give a scientific backing to the claim that mindfulness is not just a feel-good trend, but a tool that can improve performance and well-being. Cross-references to other thinkers help us see the bigger picture. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." This idea matches the Buddhist teaching that suffering comes from how we cling to thoughts. Both traditions tell us that changing our inner view can change our experience. When we practice mindfulness, we are doing what both the Buddha and the Stoics suggested, watching our thoughts without getting tangled in them. Now, let us revisit the practice we started with, the daily walk. If you want to try it, set a timer for 10 minutes. As you walk, feel each foot landing, notice the air on your skin, hear the sounds around you. If a thought pops up, label it thinking and bring your focus back. When you finish, notice how your mind feels. You may find that you are calmer, that you notice details you missed before, that you feel more present at the next task. After the walk, you can bring the same spirit to the family dinner. Put phones away, sit together, and share. Listen without interrupting. If a disagreement arises, pause, take a breath, and speak with respect. You may recall the quote from Thich Nhat Hanh. "When you love someone, the best thing you can give them is your presence." By being fully there, you turn a routine meal into a practice of harmony. You might wonder if these small steps are enough. Remember the story of the bamboo seed. A farmer plants a seed and waters it every day. For the first 4 years, nothing seems to happen. Then, in the 5th year, the bamboo shoots up to 80 feet in a few weeks. The growth was hidden underground, building a strong root system. In the same way, daily habits may feel small at first, but they build a foundation for bigger change later. Let us also think about the counter-arguments again. If you feel that a commercial app is too shallow, try pairing it with a longer session guided by a teacher, either in person or online. If you worry about trends, choose a habit that does not rely on a brand or a hashtag. The daily walk and the family dinner are free, timeless, and can be done by anyone. They do not need a subscription to stay useful. To close, let us bring back the idea of right action we talked about at the start. In the ancient texts, right action meant acting with awareness, compassion, and balance. Today, you can see that in the way a company treats its workers, in the way a student pays attention in class, in the way a parent listens at dinner. The core idea stays the same, even if the setting changes. I invite you to pick one tiny habit from what we discussed. Maybe it is a mindful walk on your way to work, or a 5-minute breathing pause before a meeting, or a phone-free dinner tonight. Try it for a week. Notice any shift in how you feel, how you think, how you relate to others. If you see a benefit, you can add another habit. If it feels hard, remember the bamboo seed. The roots are growing even if you cannot see them yet. In the end, the old teachings are not locked in monasteries or ancient scrolls. They are tools that can fit into a modern life that is busy, noisy, and often stressful. By taking a small step, you bring a piece of that wisdom into your own story. The world may be changing fast, but the simple practice of paying attention, being kind, and acting with balance can stay with you wherever you go. Try it today and see how a tiny habit can open a larger space for peace in your life.